How's it going, guys? I want to today share a little story, a little lesson about what I learned a couple weeks ago in terms of keeping reptiles. I have behind me here my 13-year-old blood python, Blooda. Like I said, I've had him since 2008, and yeah, everybody knows his backstory in terms of me selling him a couple years after picking him up and then reacquiring him from the kid that I sold him to, and just by happenstance I was able to get him back, and he's never going to leave my collection. And purposely trying to cut off the top of my head here because of my horrible haircut. I cut my own hair. I've always cut my own hair, and yeah, so I'm going to get him out, and then I'll share with you a little lesson about what I learned in terms of, you're always learning stuff, even for however long you've been in the hobby. And I haven't been in it for ages, but long enough to know what I did was a mistake, and to learn from it, and to kind of share with everybody watching. I did get bit, but yeah, I'm fine. It's just nothing sensational at all. But it's just kind of a lapse in judgment. I wasn't thinking, and hopefully my story kind of helps those keeping it home in the future. Hopefully he behaves today. This is Blooda, little 13-year-old blood python. He is he's a brown variety of the python Brongers Mai. These guys will come in bright red, brown, yellow, and his line just tends to be more on the brown side. If you look at his eyes, you'll see that, if you pause it, I guess, you'll see that he's got no subocular scales. That's one of the telltale signs that you've got a Brongers Mai and not a Sumatran black blood, as they call them, or a Britensteini, the Borneo short tail. So you can see I'm handling him, and the last interaction that we had wasn't the most pleasant thing. He actually bit me pretty good. He's never bitten me in his 13 years, but he bit me pretty good, wrapped my arm up. It was nothing, because it was just a bit of a food response, and usually when I feed him, I tend to leave him alone. But he decided to take his frozen thawed rat, and took a lot of sphagnum moss with it as well. And usually a little bit of substrate ingestion isn't a huge thing, but he actually had a huge mouthful of sphagnum moss, and I wasn't sure how he was going to react to that, or if he was going to be able to pass it okay. He probably would have been fine, but I fished him out of this 4 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot enclosure. You can see the decor back there. That's just leftover branches and whatnot that I pulled from other enclosures that where I'm not using the branching. So that allows him to climb in this 4 foot enclosure and be able to use a lot more of the space. And he's maintained good muscle tone because of when the lights go out, he's moving around and cruising his enclosure. These guys are supposed to be sedentary, but I've seen him go arboreal. When I had him in an 8 foot long enclosure, he actually would go up and hang out in the plants, 5 feet off the ground. So they'll surprise you. Anyways, 2 weeks ago, before a day or two before I got my second COVID vaccine, he bit me and wrapped me up. It wasn't a big deal. I was able to get him unhinged from my ring finger on my right hand there, and nothing too bad. But I had never made this mistake before in 13 years of keeping him, give or take about half a year or so. And the reason there was this lapse in my judgment was, I was trying to get the sphagnum moss out of his mouth, and I was worried that he was going to ingest it. I grabbed him behind his head. I haven't had to do that since having to give him oral antibiotics in like 2013, so he's not used to being handled that way, but he was always fine for that. It's just there was food involved, and I didn't think about that. And that act of not thinking things through made it so that this guy was able to bite me for the first time. But you can see he's a little squirmy, but he's a puppy dog in terms of when there's no food around, right? So, and these guys, they're a heavy-bodied snake, so you got to kind of try to support them as much as possible. But you can see he's just kind of trying to squirm away. He's getting close to my hand, but not biting or anything like that. He's a good kid. No food involved. So that was my mistake. Just kind of something to keep in mind. No matter how well you think you know your snake, they're still wild critters with, somewhat domesticated and kept as pets, but they still have that tendency to want to react especially when their minds are in a certain mode, and his was in a I'm gonna eat mode. So that was that. A bite story, but not a big deal at all. So a little bit more detail in the background there. That's just a bunch of wood piled up. He weaves and rearranges this setup, and it's enriching for him. So with that, and he's got the Universal Rocks background back there too. So with that, I'm gonna say goodbye, and thanks for listening to my long, should have been short, rambling story, and we'll catch you in the next video. See ya.